Right now, Daniel Vogelbach is slated to be the Mets' primary DH next season. The problem is he can't hit left-handed pitching and he can't field a position. Can the Mets really rely on Daniel Vogelbach to take a roster spot and to be that guy at DH, or should they be looking elsewhere trying to upgrade this offseason? I'll discuss that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Daniel Vogelbach is one of the most interesting players on the Mets heading into next season because you can make an argument that he is exactly what the Mets need him to be, and you can make an argument he should not be on this roster. It can go both ways, and we're going to explore each avenue on the show today. When the Mets acquired him, what did they want him to do? Hit right-handed pitching. Be part of a DH platoon. Well, in 55 games, he hit .255, .393 on base, .436 slugging. He had 6 home runs. He scored 18. He drove in 25 in 55 games. That's about as solid as you can expect from Daniel Vogelbach. WRC plus measures hitters based on a league average of 100. His 144 WRC plus meant he was 44% better than your league average hitter. He drew walks at an 18% clip with the Mets. That's really impressive. Now, you look at what he did last season as a whole. 18 home runs. I think the Mets would take that. In 130 games played, 47 runs scored, 59 RBIs. He had 238, 360 on base, 433 slugging, 128 WRC plus. Now, those numbers were really dragged down due to facing left-handed pitching when he was a Pirate. You look at last season batters against right-handed pitching. Daniel Vogelbach's 150 WRC plus made him the 13th best hitter in all of baseball when it comes to facing righties. You look at his on-base percentage of 382 against right-handed pitchers. That was 11th best. 497 slugging percentage. Not atop the league, but still top 25 at 23rd. He was really, really, really good. Okay, it would be hard to find as productive of a hitter in free agency unless you're going to spend a little bit, unless you're going to sign a Michael Brantley type. There's just not a lot of hitters that could perform that aspect as well. Go out, face right-handed pitching. And you look at all the advanced stuff too, right? Walk rate, obviously fantastic, in the top 2% of the league. Whiff rate, 76th percentile, so top 25% of the league. Chase rate, 94th percentile, puts him in the top 6% of the league. Barrel percentage, 75th percentile. Expected WOBA, 85th percentile. Expected slugging, 70th percentile. What all this stuff will tell you, he might strike out a little bit. His batting average is not going to be great. His expected batting average is not good. Even his hard hit percentage actually wasn't fantastic, or his average exit velocity. But incredible plate discipline is going to lead to good at-bats from Daniel Vogelbach. You will not get bad at-bats if you have him at DH. But when you have a hitter that has his limited speed, the walks aren't amounting to as much as another player, in my opinion, because it takes more to drive Daniel Vogelbach in. Now, if he's batting 6th in your lineup, I think it's fine. I think it's a fine option. But it really forces the Mets to complement him properly. Because if you don't complement Daniel Vogelbach the right way, and let's just say you put him with, I don't know, Darren Ruff, and Ruff isn't performing, well, we saw what happened last season. If you put him with the Mark Vientos, the bench is very limited defensively and just covering all these different positions that you'd like to back up. So what I want to explore next is how can the Mets complement Vogelbach? We'll look at the internal options and then look external, which we'll kind of circle back to the show yesterday and try to see if the Mets can make this work or if the best course of action is just moving on and finding a more complete player to bring into the mix. Before we get to that, though, if you're hanging out with some friends and putting a few drinks back, a few can become a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think about calling for a ride, but then you decide, nah, you live nearby, you can make it home okay, it's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst thing that could happen? Maybe your insurance goes up a little bit or you'll lose your license. It's not a big deal. Well, the problem is you could lose your job, you could total your car, or worse, you can kill someone or yourself. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still does not stop everyone from getting behind the wheel when under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe, plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life forever or someone else's. Drive sober, get pulled over. In this upcoming season, I think that we can really project forward and imagine Brett Baty and Francisco Alvarez, the two top prospects in the Mets system, having pretty significant roles. If that's the case, not in this order when it comes to Willow Bat, but your lineup, if you go across the field, you got Cannon, Nimmo, Marte. That's the outfield. Alonso, McNeil, Lindor, Baty, Alvarez behind the dish. So that's 8. Who are your 5 bench players that will DH and give you coverage across the board? Daniel Vogelbach. Louis Guillorme is your backup shortstop. Eduardo Escobar will be on the team. Tomas Nido. Who's that 5th? Of guys on the 40, you got James McCann. You want to go 3 catchers? Yeah, you can go 3 catchers, but now you got Vogelbach, Alvarez on your bench essentially that are combining at DH, and Alvarez can spare your catchers. That doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel like you have enough coverage. Who's your backup outfielder? Is it just Jeff McNeil covering all 3 spots? That's not going to work. Same thing goes with a Mark Vientos, right? You have him up. Maybe he can give you some run at third if you're lucky. Maybe left. More likely, first base is probably his only real position. At least that's what we believe at this point at the big league level. That doesn't work. Darren Ruff. He actually gives you some corner outfield defense. Not good, but he can play out there. He can play first base. But how can the Mets go into next season counting on Vogelbach and Ruff again? I think that was maybe the thought process when they traded for those 2 guys. But now you're at this juncture where I don't think you can go into next season really counting on that. Now, you can go into camp with Ruff, with McCann, with Vientos, with all these guys and try to figure it out. I would hope that they can find some way to offload James McCann that clears up a little bit of the glut. If you can clear up McCann and Ruff, all right, well now at least you know that those guys aren't getting in your way at all. Then Vientos would be the guy, but he doesn't fit with Vogelbach. He doesn't fit on this bench unless you are to move Eduardo Escobar or Louis Guillorme. And I guess Guillorme might still have an option left. Let's see. Which would be awful for him because he's clearly a big leaguer. He does have one option left. So that is, unfortunately for him, another move that could be on the table. But I spoke about this on yesterday's show. I think Adam Duvall or A.J. Pollock are a couple of guys that are right-handed that could make sense to fill in and to complement what you got with Vogelbach. I think you could also go a completely different route, and you could say get like Rafael Ortega as the 4th outfielder that can give you coverage in center, And then maybe the real answer here is Eduardo Escobar is the complement. And I think that could be the case here. Eduardo Escobar could be your everyday DH, honestly. If he's hitting, if Beatty's hitting, and Vogelbach is not, I mean, that is on the table. I could very well see him either being the right-handed half of the platoon with Vogelbach or being, your everyday DH. Now, the problem with him complimenting Vogelbach at DH and being that right-handed half of the platoon is that means Beatty is now playing every day. Because then against left-handed pitching, it has to be Beatty playing third. And I do believe that the Mets may want the option to provide him with a little bit of protection there and maybe kind of limit him facing left-handed pitching early on in his career. Now, sometimes you could say, look, if he's going to be an everyday player one day, just throw him into the fire. And I respect that, but it's just a matter of what makes the most sense here. So, internally, there's not really a good option with Daniel Vogelbach. Like, Darren Ruff is probably the best positional fit, but that you don't want to do that again. So it comes to external options, and I do think if the Mets were to sign Adam Duvall, a lot of these problems go away. He backs up all your outfield spots. He can DH for you against left-handed pitching. Escobar can platoon with Beatty at third, so that would be locked in. Escobar can give you some more coverage at DH and second base, and you can make a bench work then if you had Duvall, because at least then you have someone that can start in left, center, and right if any of those guys are out. The thing is, your roster construction becomes a lot easier if Daniel Vogelbach is not in the picture. How good is he against right-handed pitching that it's worth trying to make it work in another direction? Is Daniel Vogelbach and Adam Duvall a better option than getting a really good left-handed hitter that can be your DH, that can play a position, where then, because that DH has the ability to back up some outfielders and play a position, then you can roll the dice more with a Ruff and or a Mark Vientos. And that's what we'll discuss next. But first, another word from our sponsors. So should the Mets move off of Daniel Vogelbach and just try completely from fresh at DH? On yesterday's show, I spent some time on Joey Gallo and Michael Conforto. I think that's two guys you could bring in that on almost any given season prior to last year, you would have said that you would have preferred to have either of them over Vogelbach. You'd be betting on them being better. You'd be clearing way for them to get playing time where they would want to sign with you. They would give you coverage in the outfield. And then you can really experiment with Mark Vientos as a DH. Because those guys have other roles that they can fill. And also, if that was the case, you could then go with three catchers if you wanted to. And then suddenly it's Alvarez maybe instead of Vientos. That would be another option. You can really play a lot more with your lineups if you clear Vogelbach. Because you can also get Pete off his feet a little bit at first. You can get Starling Marte off his feet in right field, especially if you were to have a Conforto or a Gallo. You can, mix and match with Escobar and Beatty. And there's a lot of things you can do if you clear Vogelbach. But he's still a good hitter. And he's dirt cheap. He has a better chance than anyone to outperform his contract next season just based on how cheap he really is. You're not trading him to clear money. $1.5 million or whatever the exact number is. I know it's less than $2 million. That's not going to impact you on the luxury tax. So I think you are not in a rush to move him. But if the right free agent wants to play for you, if you're canvassing the market, and whether that is a Brantley, a Conforto, a Gallo, a JD Martinez, if one of those guys is out there that wants you, or if you even are looking in the trade market and you can buy someone who can fit that role, I don't think you can be that dead set committed to Daniel Vogelbach. But I also don't think you get much for him in a trade either. I mean, I think you could find a partner, that's for sure. But you have to find the right team that wants a DH and one that's flawed, and then he can't hit left-handed pitching, and he doesn't, again, as a DH, he doesn't play a position. So, yes, could they move him? Absolutely. They also could cut him, and it wouldn't even be a sweat off your back. I just think that at some point by the end of next season, the Mets are going to look at Daniel Vogelbach, and they're just going to think that the fit doesn't make sense anymore. Whether they come to that decision in spring training or during the season. Now, I also could very well see a scenario where I'm completely wrong on this one, where Daniel Vogelbach can be that real threat at DH. He can get on base at a 380 clip with all the walks that he has. He can hit 25 bombs, and you found the right person to complement him, which, again, I believe has to be an outfielder that hits from the right side that can cover all three positions. So we'll see where the Mets go with this one. I don't at all think the Mets made the wrong decision making that trade. Colin Holderman did not have success when he went to Pittsburgh, either in the minor leagues or in the majors. Not to say that he won't in the future, but it was a relief pitcher. It's not something that is hard to replace. I thought he performed very well last season for the cost of a reliever. I think he could perform well again this year. But I still really view this team, and I think that the prospects are the X factors. And there's three of them. It's Alvarez and Beatty, and it's Mark Vientos. I think clearing that DH spot up so that a Vientos or an Alvarez or even a Beatty to a certain extent can have an opportunity to grab ABs there, I think that would really help the Mets. So we'll see what happens over the coming weeks and months. And I think in spring training, it's going to be a very open competition. And I would predict that Vogelbach will be there still by spring training and will play a big role in it. But, if you make another signing, you could end up in a point where he becomes expendable. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I just recorded 3 shows in one night, but you'll hear them across 3 days, going out of town on Wednesday. So this nearly concludes the week. I have one more show heading your way that I will be recording tomorrow morning, which would be Tuesday morning. Guess I'm already at Tuesday morning right now. But that's going to be with Arm Layton, prospect expert for just baseball. And that'll build off of this show as well because we will be discussing Beatty and Alvarez. Really think this week has been good to get a clear picture of where this Mets roster is as they're nearly complete. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around sports. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.